Alright, so we got the GAT completely disassembled now. Here's some of the parts that I took out of it. The biggest things to note is the damage that I got. This was a $50 GAT on HopUp, and I'm repairing it for a mate, but the damage is pretty extensive. You can see this entire piston is just stripped out. We definitely need a new one there. The spur gear has a chip, and it's missing a tooth, and I actually found that tooth caught up right there. I thought it was some weird metal part trying to keep the wires out or something. Nope, turns out that was a chip of the gear. So we've got some new parts. I'll probably be keeping the stock cylinder and cylinder head. I don't see any reason to replace that. The compression was absolutely horrible. It was so bad. So we got a new piston head as well. And the trigger we're going to keep. The trigger trolley was super bad. It was actually, you still can probably see it a little bit, it's kind of melted on one side. I did my best to scrape it off and to make it new, and it seems to work with preliminary tests by just hooking up the motor and the trigger contact. But here is the HopUp. The rubber was a little bit mangled as well. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you see that right there? Yeah, it's not in a good way. You know, I'm never really one for cleaning the barrels, but the barrel looks pretty dirty, and I'm going to give it a shot. I got some isopropyl alcohol prep pads. I'm going to just swab through there. So here's what I'll be putting in, though. I'm a big fan of Modify, just in general. I think they make great stuff. So I'm going to be putting in their flat hop and the nub. I did have problems with one of those before, but let's see if it'll work fine this time. I need some new shims. The GAT comes notoriously horribly shimmed, so I needed a full new set of shims for mine. This is my buddy's, and I decided I needed to pick up new ones. We got another modified P90 nozzle. That is the size of the GAT one, so it'll fit in the GAT gearbox, which is mostly V2 with some proprietary parts, and that nozzle. A Modify piston head. Again, big fan of Modify stuff. I think it's killer. And lastly, I got a stock piston. All my stuff was bought at MiR Tactical, great local store by me, and they offered to give me just a regular stock piston for $5, so I decided to take up that offer. I just need it running. It's not going to be high stress. Previous owner clearly ran this with an 11.1. I will not be doing that on this one. This should just be fitting a 7.4 volt in the handguard. So I will now just assemble a little bit of it and keep you updated as it goes. Alright, so first thing I want to do is shim the gears. These are all cleaned off. I use soapy water on them all. This is actually a spur gear from my AGM STG44, I think XYZ brand. Just this one just has the X on it. So we're going to do the bevel to pinion method of shimming, where we hook this up like this, and then we hook one of these up like that, and in a nutshell, we just make sure that it is shimmed, the motor height is right, and then we can shim this to make sure it's perfectly goes along with the next gear, and then we shim the next gear to make sure it perfectly goes along with this gear. And yeah, it's a little bit of a train, but I enjoy shimming. I'm not going to film it just because it's kind of a two-hand process, but that is the general gist of what we will be doing. So I just noticed that this gear that comes with the Echo 1 GAT, this is a first gen GAT by the way, it's got this weird like moat almost around the axle. So I'm just going to throw in the bevel gear from my STG, and they are not XYZ brand, apparently they are JG. So who'd have thought? But yeah, I'll just pop those in the GAT instead. That should save me, gosh, at least 5 of my thick shims, because this is a pretty big moat. So good thing we are replacing the stock bevel gear with a new one, because I just realized it's missing a tooth down here. That is very important. So make sure before you put a gearbox together that you check all the gears, especially with the used gun, and make sure all of the teeth are there, because that is a big problem. Interesting thing I'm noticing about these SHS shims. Ordinarily they come like this. This is from my old set. There's a gold, I don't know if you can see it, but that is gold. there's a silver, and then there's a hexagonal. And this is 0.1 millimeters, this is 0.15, and this is 0.2. These are all the 0.1 ones, so SHS just sometimes does this, and it's not that big of a deal. I like having these 0.15s because I can get really precise if I want, but I do like a little bit, especially with bearings, with ball bearings, a little bit more leeway anyway, so the 0.05 millimeter is just a little bit too precise this time around. But I am glad that I at least have these. I got a pair of SHS shims off Airsoft Atlanta recently, and they sent me just the Rocket brand, which is like SHS. They send just these. These are silver. And those are just the 0.15, so I don't know, that was weird. I definitely like these hexagonal ones, though. I think I have a theory that there's more surface area and that they hold better, so I don't know, but just noteworthy. Alright, this is not shimmed. I just put a shim just on the bottom of some of these just to make sure that they had some clearance off the gearbox, and I'm rolling it now, and just look at how silky smooth that spinning is. There's just something oddly satisfying about spinning some gears in a gearbox. Ooh, and it's even better like this. Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I love it. But as beautiful as that was not fully shimmed. So what we're going to do is make sure that each gear is properly shimmed, and then we'll put the motor in and do the bevel pinion method. So the first thing is to make sure that it's all shimmed in place, and one easy way I like to do that is, this is just a very basic method, and we can fine tune it later, but I just put in one simple screw here, and what I'm going to do is just let gravity hold it down and just push on the underside. You can probably see it moving just a little. Hopefully I can get a better angle. Now let's try this gear right here. And again, I do apologize for my fingernails. I swear to God, I do maintain myself. This is just a time where I did not do it before the video. Look at how much that one's moving. That one we're going to want to put in an extra shim for. So now let's try the sector gear. That one as well is moving a little bit. And you can actually see it moving, the sector gear as well. So I'm going to put some more shims on until they're tight. At least tighter. As tight as the first one. Alright, so now we got this back together. I did end up putting an extra shim right here on the bevel gear, and we can tell. Another thing I like to do once it's getting really precise, I'll keep my thumbnail on one side and then press down to see exactly how far down it goes. Here, let me see if I can get a better angle. You see it moving just a little bit? You can actually feel it. I prefer to, at this level, just to feel it. So this is looking, that's looking okay. I think I'm going to keep it like that. This one, you can do the same thing too. This one might need another one. And then this one, I already tested. I made it a little bit too tight just so I could show you what it's like. So there's no movement at all on this gear. And that means we're going to have to take one away from there and probably put it on that one. Alright, I got to a point where I'm pretty happy with it, and I just want to show you where it's at. I am taking my fingers and pushing on the gears from the other side. It actually might just be easier to show you. But what I'd like to do is hold it up like this and then press it down just to see. So I'm happy there. Please ignore my thumbnail. That is gross. I'm happy there. It's just a little bit of leeway. And I'm happy. Gosh, I hope you can see it. I'm happy there. And when you're at a place where you're happy enough, a little bit on the loose side of happy enough, hopefully, you gotta put in all the screws. I know it's a pain, but there's no way to make sure that the gears are perfectly meshed on the inside unless you put in all of the screws. So I'm going to do that, and we will test it again. Alright, so now we got it all together, and honestly I don't even need a screwdriver. I'm just going to use my gross long fingernails. I am so sorry. Gosh, that is just truly terrible on my part. But yeah, you can see just a little bit. I can feel it more than I can see it, that it's moving back and forth just a little bit. It is a little bit tighter with all of these screws in, so it is a good thing that we put all the screws on. All right, now that we know that our gears are properly shimmed, at least lengthwise in the gearbox, we need to figure out how exactly to shim them with the motor in play. So what we're going to do, and I'm just doing this to simulate what exactly is going to be going on inside the gearbox, we want this pinion gear to be inside this gear enough. So if I look at it directly above, you can see at this angle, it's actually a little bit outside of where it should be. We want it to be, we want it to be like probably here. So there's a few ways to do that. The best way to do that, of course, is to shim the motor. So putting a shim back here. Of course, this is just a simulation, if you will, just to see exactly how it's going to perform. So we have to do this with the shell on. The general method is to take shims from the bottom that we place them on and to put them on the top. A special note with that is that gears that are flat, like this one, will always need a shim. Otherwise, the bottom will be scraping against the gearbox shell, and that is bad. We will get more friction, and it will not be as efficient. So you always need at least one shim on this. Another common one is the spur gear. Generally is a super flat back, and we don't want it rubbing on the inside. So we'll always need at least one shim there. But other than that, the general method is to take them from the bottom, the shims from the bottom, and pop them on the top until it is sufficiently aligned. So let's get to that. All right, so this is one of the trickiest parts of this entire operation. It's making sure that it's aligned with the pinion gear. And what you do is you take a screwdriver or whatnot, and you put it in there, and you want it to make sure that it wiggles just a little bit. You see that? Unfortunately, I can't get too good of an angle, but it is wiggling. That means that there's just a little bit of space in between the pinion and the bevel, and that means that it is shimmed properly. Now, there's a lot of different methods to shimming once you've got the bevel meshed with the pinion. One of my favorite ways to do it, I think it's more efficient, is to just eyeball it at first and to guess. So here we got our spur gear in, we're going to put our bevel in, and what we want to see is just a little bit of leeway in between the two gears. So hopefully I've got a good enough angle here. You see that space right there? That's looking a little bit too tight for me. It's actually, this one you actually have a pretty decent amount of space in because these are some of the widest teeth right here. So we want it to sit a little bit higher, probably like here-ish. So what we're going to do is very simple. We take this and make sure you do not mess up your shims. You got to remember which shims go to which gear, else you got to do this whole process over again, and oh, can it be a pain. So I like to do one gear on the left side, other gear on the right side, so you can know if there are spare shims, you know where they go. So what we did is we lowered the spur gear a little bit. That's looking okay. That's looking okay. But we do have to put it together to test it, so I'm going to do that. All right, we got the gearbox together with just 2 screws. You're going to have to take the screwdriver, reach it inside, and spin the gear itself. I've tried several different ways. I can't get a good angle at this, but you're going to have to believe me and hear it. Oh. That's a pretty decent amount of spinning, so we can assume that is a thumbs up. Alright, so now we do the same thing with the sector gear. The teeth are not as wide here as they are at the bottom of the bevel gear, so we are going to shim it a little bit tighter. You can see it's just hardly touching. Again, this is a ballpark, and we will have to put it all together just to make sure that the teeth are aligned. Another thing you have to look out for is rusty bearings. Now, if we see over here, hopefully you can see it, these are all silver, but these bearings are a little bit rusted out. And what happens is when we spin a rusted bearing that's properly shimmed, it won't spin with it. So it's effectively a bushing, and all of its extra benefit of being a bearing is lost. So make sure that your bearings are clean or non-rusty at least, or otherwise you might as well have bushings. Another thing you should be on the lookout for is a whirring noise. You hear that? Now that could very well mean that something is not shimmed properly. There could be several different things, meshing just between the gears, but it could also be the meshing of the axle of the gear with the bearing. There could be some wobble, and that could just be because of your bearings being worn out or not high quality or for whatever reason. So definitely make sure you at least check out the whirring noise and make sure you understand what it's from before you put it together and give it the go-ahead, because especially if it's a high-stress build, it could mean problems. So definitely look at the whirring noise, but it's not necessarily a problem with your shimming. Alright, we've got a view from down in between the middle of the gearbox. I have deduced that the whirring is between the bevel gear and the spur gear. So right where it meshes, I think, is where the whirring noise is coming from. But if we spin it, see if I can get a good spin in here. You can see, hopefully you can, there's actually a little bit of space in between the spur and the bevel when it's spun, so I know this is shimmed well enough. I should have expected there to be a whirring issue, and that is not a big deal in this setup because I am using gears from at least 2, potentially even 3 different sets. So just weird issues between meshing in between teeth, that's okay, as long as we know that the gearbox is shimmed. Alright, that about does it. The gearbox is shimmed well enough, and we are going to continue with the rest of the assembly. Alright, now we have a properly shimmed gearbox, and I'm going to start putting in the upgrade pieces. So I'm going to start by cleaning off this piston. It is a stock piston, but it was only $5, so I'm okay with that. I'm going to take a paper towel and just kind of get in the ridges there. Yeah, get all that dirty grease, yeah. Isn't this fun? It's a fun Saturday activity. I literally look forward to this kind of stuff all week. You know, there's something about like just putting a gear set together and just making a gearbox really sing. It's just always a fun time. So, alright, that looks clean enough. What I'm going to do now is, it looks clean, but it's probably still got some gear residue on it. So I got these rubbing alcohol little pads, and it's kind of killer, really. I mean, I recommend it. It's single use. It comes in a huge packet. Think of like 200. Just get in there nice and clean out the rest of that. Only problem is that this stuff evaporates quick, so you kind of got to bunch the pad together like this. That's acceptable. We can do that. Get all that stock grease out of these. They really like to load stock gearboxes up. It's horrible, really. Alright, so now we got that done. Let's unscrew on the inside. Will this fit? Ooh, and it will. This is like my trusty screwdriver. I've had this for so long. I've used it for countless different projects. You know, airsoft and not. Why can't I get that screw, though? Is that it? Did I get it? Is there no screw? It's really just... Wow. Huh. What do you know? No wonder it wasn't catching on to anything. There was no screw. Huh. Cool. Oh, we got that. I'm going to clean that out a little bit. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, that's just some crappy stock piston extra plastic in there. Now, that hole's got to be big enough to fit a new piston head through, so you see that it's kind of all rough around the edges. Let me see if I can just at least get that. If not, I do have a file, so use that. But these These hex blades, I mean, you can use them for this as well. Hex is my favorite screw, for anyone curious. I think it's really easy to grip onto a screw using a hex blade. You can use them for Allen keys. Clean it out. And here we go. Piston is ready to go. Here we have the stock cylinder head and nozzle. We will not be using the nozzle. It does not have an O-ring, therefore it is dead to me. You guys want to hear a really sexy noise? Gosh, that is just absolutely brilliant. Alright, so now we've got the Modify piston head. I am a fan of Modify stuff. I think they're pretty good with quality. And we're going to take the ball bearing part and put it in between these two washers so it's able to spin. We're going to take this end cap, put it right through here, and we are going to feed it through. See if I can do this carefully. Just screw on it first. There, that might be easier. I like to try to, you know, try to get it to balance like that. Just on the tip of the screwdriver, and then just like, whoop. Perfect. That could qualify as porn. But it won't. Unless YouTube algorithms get me. So, just like that, we will start putting on the piston head. One thing that I want to note is that I usually prefer to keep the ball bearings away from the piston just to keep that weight down and prevent any premature engagement, unless you're doing a build for jewel creep. But in this kind of setting, we don't have a spring guide that's ball bearing. It's not a big deal. I'm not too worried about PME anyway. The stock piston did have a ball bearing spring guide, so this should be good for the piston. Now that we have the piston together, I wanted to play around a little bit with this nozzle and the compression. Let's pop this bad boy out. We have the cylinder. I have cleaned it with the isopropyl alcohol, and I do have the cylinder head. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on them. They say less is more. I think when it comes to air seal grease, I'm probably a little bit more liberal than with my gear grease, just because I really want that big seal, and because I don't really see it doing anything negative to affect performance. So I'll rub that around the rimmy here, give it a nice rimmy, and put that in a little bit too much and pull it out. It seemed like the compression was pretty good on the cylinder, so I'm not terribly worried about that. This is a ball bearing nozzle, so we will put a little, just a little kiss, a gentle kiss of grease on the inside. Oh, I say gentle, but I put in a ton. Whoops. Oh well. Again, not going to be that big of a deal. That being said, I put in a little bit too much. So here we are. We got that going. Now, the last thing we need to grease is the piston head. So put it all around, and I'll make sure that the piston head, or the O-ring around the piston head, is properly lubed. Just by squeezing it around, that should be good. So now we're going to take this setup as it would be in the gearbox. I'm just going to rub it around a little bit. So we're going to do a poor man's compression test, and that's basically where if I cover this nozzle, there should be some resistance after it gets past the O-ring. So I'm going to cover the nozzle. Nothing. Hardly anything. I feel hardly any resistance. So I'm going to continue messing with this until we get it right. Alright, so we got a change of scenery here. What I did was I took the O-ring off of the piston head because it was failing our compression test. And I put it around the cylinder here. And what we're going to do, I made sure it was all clean. I got rid of all the grease here. what I'm going to do is take this lighter and just warm it. Okay, we don't want to burn it. We just want to get it to the point where it's warm to the touch. So give that a shot. Of course, this is going to put some residue on it. Not quite there yet. We will have to clean that residue off though when it's done, because you don't want that residue inside there. We want our lube in there, our air seal lube. So now we're just going to wait for it to be cool, and then we will install it back onto the piston head. Alright, we're back at the battle bench. I have cleaned off the O-ring and put it back on, and I could just tell just by slipping it on, it is just so much, or at least a little bit bigger. So I think that did the trick. So what we're going to do is lube it up again. And we're going to put it in. Look at how excited it is. Oh, I can already tell this is going to work. Yeah, look at that. So now we'll do it with the O-ring, nozzle, and perfect compression. So it'll go fine past the port, but once it gets to the port, that is it. So that is a great compression. We're going to pop this in. Ordinarily, I would correct for angle of engagement, and that is where this tooth of the piston is picked up by the first tooth of the sector gear. But, I mean, just looking at it now, it's pretty spot on. I mean, that could be from the new piston head. Maybe there's a little bit extra space in there. It did seem like that, so I'm just going to leave it the same because it looks like it is meshing up all right. So I'm okay with that. The trigger mechanism for the GAT is proprietary. This is mostly a version 2 gearbox, but the trigger contact especially is kind of this weird version 2, version 3 thing. It does go outside, which is handy because we don't have to do too much with wiring the gears inside, which is always a pain in version 2 gearboxes. It does use this trigger trolley, which will go here, and this part of the spring will hook up to here. And that is a two-hand job, and I will never say that again, but we're going to put that in, and we're going to put a screw right there. We got the trigger trolley successfully set up, which was important because when I first got this, the trigger you could pull and you wouldn't feel anything at all because the trigger trolley was all jacked up. It was way out of line and not good. So now we're going to be putting in the tappet plate, and we are going to put the spring here and there to attach it. Of course, hook it onto the nozzle. I believe the Echo 1 GAT is already like this, but this might have been modified by the previous user to be run with a dual sector gear. I doubt it. It doesn't look like the person who was in here before was very technical at all. But, you know, it is kind of weird for a tappet plate to be pre-cut like this. But we'll find out when it's all together. Before we get onto the tappet plate, because the tappet plate will go over the gears, we've got to make sure our gears are greased. So I pulled this gear out with a pair of pliers, and I'm just going to apply some grease to them real quick. I've mostly done it. I just kind of want to show you the technique. So what I like to do is dip a screwdriver inside the gear grease. Here's my gear grease. And some people recommend Q-tips or toothpicks. I like a screwdriver just because I have it handy, but I will say a Q-tip is probably the best. And then just put it on over. You don't want to put too much on because gear grease attracts debris, and you don't want debris around the gears of your gearbox. So just slather it on lightly. I'm putting a little bit more on the teeth on the top here because this will go to the piston, and I did not grease the piston too well. So put that back just like that, make sure it's in, and then just give it a quick spin just to make the grease go all the way around. And there you go. Using the same process, we're going to apply a little bit of grease here so the piston can slide easily, and of course on the other side of the gearbox shell. Speaking of greasing, we will need to grease the bearings, and I have a special G&P bearing grease. This is not a very scientific process. Just want to put a little bit of bearing grease in there. Make sure it gets inside the ridge and then spin it around a little bit. And then of course you're just going to dry the excess off. And be careful, it will actually leak, so put it on a paper towel just to be safe. Everything is greased, and now we are going to put on this spring to the tappet plate. Now, one thing I'd like to note about the spring and the tappet plate is that you want this angle down, or at least I like to put. See how it's kind of L-shaped? We want this part sitting down. That way when we're putting together the gearbox, if we do it this way, this is closer to the top and it might pop off. It's a very small worry, but it's definitely noteworthy. So we'll put it around this side like meow. Come on, Bessie. And we'll take that. We'll kind of overshoot it. Holding this down. There we go. That was a little bit more rugged than I prefer to do it usually, but we got it on. Next we have two of the most dreaded parts of a gearbox assembly. We have the trigger and we have the anti-reversal latch. I've got something special planned for these bad boys though. I picked up this gearbox installation kit, and these clamps are supposed to help with keeping it down. So let's bust this bad boy open and see exactly how they work. So the clips actually are pretty cool. You put them in just as you normally would. The GAT trigger is a little tricky, but as soon as you get that in, just hold it down and then you put this clip in. And the idea is when you put on the gearbox shell, bloop, when it's just like this, pull them out. So that is about it for the installation. I mean, all we have left is the spring guide and, of course, wherever I put it, the springs. So let's get to the big step here. Now, I know we want to recommend springs that are non-linear, so, you know, ones that are not all the same the whole way through, just for stress issues inside the gearbox. But honestly, I just love installing these compared to non-linear springs, because look at how much bigger it is than the spring guide. It's literally nothing. But anyway, let's get started. What I like to do is take a piece of metal like that, press that in. There's hardly any pressure here. This is just great. And the reason I like this is because you see the tip here? It's on the inside of the piston, so it'll only pop out about that much. That being said, I don't like to test it. I'll pull these away. And there we have a remarkably buttery gearbox assembly. So I'll rescrew it, and then when we have the motor on, we'll test it. The GAT trigger is obnoxious, unfortunately, and it's really just a pain to put in. But for the record, this is how the spring sits on it. The GAT trigger is obnoxious. It's actually one of my least favorite parts about the GAT. It's just because it's so weird and hard to put on. But this is how the spring is supposed to be sat. It's supposed to sit just flush on here, so this part is behind the back. And it is really hard to keep the spring part pushing forward, but that is how it goes on, because this goes over the ridge by the trigger contact here. So just keep finagling it and you'll get it, but it is a pain. The way I like to put the trigger into the GAT gearbox is by angling the spring so it hits this wall first, like pulling it in like this and then hooking this part down through. These clips are actually coming in huge handy for it because it's a very narrow line. If this part of the spring goes past the trigger, then we lose all compression and the trigger is just kind of useless. It's a good idea to get in the routine of getting screws that are opposite from each other. you know, if there's ones here as well. This is a low stress build, and there's not many screws on the GAT gearbox, so there's not much for me to do it that way, but that is a good way of reassembling a gearbox. Now that we've got the gearbox back together and I have connected the motor tabs, it's time to figure out how the heck this thing goes on. This is the fire selector. I know there are 2 screws. I have a modern GAT, and I believe there's only 1 screw, but I might be wrong on that, so I'm going to have to figure out how this exactly works. Right on. So now we have the weird selector plate cutoff lever combo on, and I'm pretty sure that's where the screws go. I think the black one goes on top and the silver goes a little bit lower. And now it's the moment of truth, guys. I got this battery, and we're going to plug it in and see how it performs. This is the first test. Come on, baby. Oh. Maybe the battery's dead. Alright, so we had a little hiccup. Turns out that these wires right here were pinched a little bit. That was leaving this crack open long enough for this spring on the trigger to pop out from behind the trigger, and the trigger was having no retention. So I stand by it. This is the worst trigger design in all of Airsoft, at least that I've seen. So we got it fixed together. We hooked it up to a battery. This is a different battery, a 1300 milliamp hour, 25 to 50C discharge, 7.4, and let's give it a test. That is a-okay. We did not change out anything for the power. We just replaced the gears to make it better, and the motor is still stock. All of our upgrades were compression, so we won't see those in a test like this. However, for a stock gearbox, I'm glad we got it running, and now we've got I'm pretty confident in the compression. We've tested out. It is perfectly sealed. It's got some modified parts in this. Shout out to MiR Tactical. And the gearbox part of this project is done. Alright, so I have an isopropyl wipe. I've got this little rod. I'm just going to clean this out a little bit. They say not to use metal inside your barrel. I don't recommend it. I just don't have another part handy, so that's what I'm going to be doing. Be very careful. Oh, and look at all the gunk that came out. That was a good investment. It is a stock barrel. It's not like I'm expecting too much out of it, but I did it one more time and nothing really came out, so I'm going to assume this is pretty clean. Now we're going to put in the nub and the bucking, which, you guessed it, is by Modify. So I'll remove these from the package and put them around the barrel. To my knowledge, Modify is the only company that sells a good flat hub nub that comes with a bucking. So another reason to support Modify there. I swear to God I'm not sponsored. Just every tech plays their favorites, and I think Modify's mine. So we'll put on that bucking right there. Now it's a very tight fit in the GAT chamber here, so I'm going to get some silicone oil and we'll spray the outside here so it slides in nice. Alright, so we have the barrel here and we put on the Modify bucking already. I love Modify products. It's the only product to my knowledge that includes a flat hop bucking and nub, and for 15 bucks, man, I mean that's just killer, so you can't really go wrong. We're not going to put it in the GAT chamber. The only problem with the GAT chamber is that it's very tight, so I'm going to be putting some silicone spray, some light, very light silicone, on just the outside of the bucking, not the inside. We don't want it on the inside, and this will just help with lube. So here, let me spray it off camera. Here we go. So we put a little bit on there. Just make sure this is good. There, it slid right in. So there we have it. Now I'm going to put the nub in between. Let's take that old nub is already off, or it just fell off right there. So I'll take this new bad boy, set him in there. I'll make sure he sits right. Yeah, that's a little bit tricky, but we can get it. There, perfect. I'll push it back just a little. And shabam. There you have it. She's on. Let me make sure she's all lined up. Yeah, you can see in there that she's good. I'll put this pin through here. Ooh, she's a stiff pin. Oh, that's because she goes in through the other side. So we'll squeeze that in right there. That'll keep the arm still. I'll put that C-clamp in because this barrel be sliding. And I'm just going to test, before I put the screw in, I'm going to test down the barrel here to make sure when I push it, the nub goes up and down. You can see that it is working, so that is good news. I'm going to make sure this is aligned properly. Take that C-clamp off real quick. Make sure these parts are on the same parts of both sides. Okay, they're level. Put that C-clamp back on. I'm going to double check it just to make sure that it is working right. So I want to make sure that nub is right on top of the chamber. So that looks good. And looks like the HopUp installation has been complete, minus this screw, which I will put in right here. It is hard doing this with the camera up between my legs. But there we go. HopUp is all ready. Let's reassemble it and put it all back in the gap. I almost forgot this handy piece we will need while we reassemble it, so be sure to put that on as well. Alright, so we got the battery hooked up, the gearbox inside, and everything has been tuned. Let's test fire it. Yeah, seems to be working okay. We switch it to semi. Yeah, there we go. Everything in the GAT is working perfectly. I'm pretty happy with how this went, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So shout out to MiR Tactical. Thank you for all the modify parts I used today, and hope you guys enjoyed it. Happy airsofting.